key thing in this debate is that there are a number of different teams in an organization that want to be putting content out on digital channels. And ultimately, if it's going to work, someone needs to coordinate that. Someone ultimately is going to have to press the button. And I think that best sits within a corporate communications team, making sure it's all planned, coordinated, and frankly checked to make sure that it keeps in play in line with everything else the organization is saying externally.
This whole idea of having internal division between the origination and distribution of content between departments is an archaic nonsense, and it's legacy thinking for an analog world where we used to push out messages to stakeholders and customers and control the environments in which they receive them. We can't do that anymore. We have to look at the people we're trying to engage with and think about how they want to receive and engage with the content and the messages that we make available to them.
Having different departments oversee different aspects of digital, or even the same aspects of digital, whether it's content creation, monitoring, and so on, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but ultimately it needs to be coordinated how that content's going to be distributed. So on the monitoring side, actually, it's potentially a loss of resource if you are having lots of different teams ultimately doing the same thing. So clearly that's something that organizations should be considering very closely. On the content creation side, different teams are using different types of content with ultimately different audiences at the end of the day. And so the corporate comms team's job should be to coordinate that content and make sure that it's going out at the right time to the right people in the right way. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with a big mishmash of content going out to lots and lots of different people where, frankly, it's not so relevant. So I think it is very important that it is coordinated, even though there are going to be lots of teams creating the content itself.
I'm not necessarily a great advocate of hierarchy and command and control structures, but at the end of the day, somebody has to determine what the hierarchy of messaging and conversations are going to be, and those conversations with customers and stakeholders needs to be managed. So having these two departments just doesn't really make sense. We don't need departmental structures in order to manage conversations with customers and stakeholders. What we need is coherence and consistency of messaging, irrespective of which department it emanates from.
Reputational risk for me is one of the biggest issues with social media in particular. Other digital channels as well, but particularly on social. You just have to look at the examples of what has happened over recent years to see this. And I actually don't think it's a debate as to whether or not there is reputational risk attached with using these channels. But saying that, that's not a reason not to use the channels. It's just a case of needing to be more careful with who's using it, making sure that everyone knows who has access to the channels and actually putting the content out there, making sure that the correct sign-off processes are in place. It's not really a case of saying no, it's a case of making it work in a way that is going to manage that reputational risk. And ultimately, and I don't think anyone would argue this from the marketing side of teams, that when it is a reputational issue, it very much falls within the realms of corporate comms to manage, react, and ultimately deal with that crisis.
If a company is not joined seamlessly between its various departments, then it's completely screwed, basically. And the people, the general population, whether they be customers or stakeholders or other stakeholders or suppliers, they will join the dots. The most common mistake that companies make when preparing and implementing digital strategies and campaigns is they don't manage data. In today's world, the management of data and deriving insight from data is both the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity, because the data trail that digital leaves has immense value. If you can mine that data and understand what your customers and stakeholders are doing, saying, and how they are behaving, it is absolutely critical. And many companies are sleepwalking into giving away their data. And being negligent in the way, in the way that they don't use the data that's available to them. In today's world, you have to use the data to understand what your customers are saying to you, how they're engaging to you, and ultimately what they want. Because they're telling you what they want. If you choose not to listen, then you're on a hide into nothing. You're just pissing away your money.
I think the main mistake companies and organizations make when planning digital campaigns is a silo mentality. So not being aware of all the other teams that rightly have a claim on social channels. So yes, marketing clearly is going to use digital channels. Corporate comms and PR, again, clearly going to be using those channels. But we need to consider investor relations, government affairs, customer service, obviously, is a key channel. Recruitment and HR, IT, there are lots of teams within an organization that will want to be part of the activity that's going on. So I think the biggest mistake is not making sure that all those different stakeholders are involved in the process from an early stage to make sure that they're in agreement and also feeding into it, because ultimately that's going to result in a better outcome for the organization than if it's just dealt with in a silo mentality.
I remember in my early days, I remember someone saying to me about a media strategy being like a mixed salad. You shouldn't be able to taste any individual ingredient, but it should have an overall effect.